Kiran.
Good.
Been
Namaskar.
such a long time.
Yeah. Namaskar, namaskar. How are you?
Well, we are all locked down, aren't we? 7 billion people obediently locked down.
Yes. Okay.
So, we've just, namaskar everyone. You've just started streaming live, and we are so glad that Vandana ji has joined us today. And I'll just take a minute to give a brief introduction of you and tell how this is going to progress, and also talk about people who have joined us today on the call who will be behind the scenes. So we also have Dr. Seth with us, the founder of SPIC MACAY. We have Varun Bhaiya, a volunteer joining from Bangalore to help me relay the question to you. We have Hemant, another student volunteer on standby to help with the live streaming if in case there are any technical glitches. And we have Abhishek Bhaiya who's doing the main streaming and helping us out there. So first of all, a small introduction. So, a globally well-known intellectual and activist, Vandana Shiva has shown ongoing commitment in different fields, making it difficult to label her name under a precise and unique category. At the core of her activism, there are counter-development in favor of people-centered participatory processes, support to grassroots networks, women rights, and ecology. So I really think because time is so precious, we'll start interacting right away without a more elaborated introduction.
Sure.
So first of all, you're joining us today on World Earth Day, and it's the 50th Earth Day, and we are really lucky again that in such a crucial time, you have been able to spare some time for us. But right along those lines, we also have like World Water Day, Earth Hour, and other such initiatives looking perhaps to bring about some togetherness in the global community in a fight against climate change. So what do you think of such initiatives?
Well, initiatives like World Water Day or World Earth Day have basically had to be created because the dominant system is destroying the earth, it's destroying the water, and because when movements grow big, then they kind of give a day. And these days are useful, they're necessary, they're not enough to bring the change. But it's not the case that all the days and years have only been created from the north. When I started to save seeds and started the movement Navdanya, my focus was on the beautiful millets, the forgotten foods. India used to eat 80%, like the forgotten classical music that SPIC MACAY promotes. The best foods of India were millets, 70%, but for the Green Revolution, they destroyed it. So we call them forgotten foods, and I'm very happy that after all these years, 2023 will be an international year of millets 3 years from now. And that's the initiative from India. And Gandhi came from India, and 2nd October is a World Satyagraha Day. And I think this year, on 2nd October, we really should do a very creative Satyagraha for the kind of future we want and against the future we don't want.
So just like you rightly mentioned, some of these days have come to us from the Western world. And of course, they are effective to some extent, no doubt. But do you think that some of these initiatives end up being only Western diktats, which only to cater to a certain and perhaps a small part of the population of third world countries identify with? So how do we really overcome such disparities to build a feeling of togetherness to fight such a problem that will cut across man-made borders?
Well, I basically see the destruction of the earth as a continuation of the process of colonialism. My early involvement with the Chipko movement led me to study what colonial forestry had done to this land, which Tagore called the Aranya Sanskriti, where even in my office when I was in IIM Bangalore, I had a coconut tree going through the Bangalore office. This is modern Bangalore. And the peepal tree hadn't been chopped for making the way for the car. So much of what we adopted is a continued colonization. And my mind is working a lot right now during the COVID crisis, how this crisis is being used for the new colonization, but we have to have the philosophy, the ability to recognize it as colonization now of our minds and our bodies. The COVID crisis itself is a result of a certain economic model that sees humans as separate from nature, sees some humans as having the right to take what they want from where they want it. This is what globalization really means. And we know that most of the new emergent diseases, which don't belong to humans, have come by destroying forests, the Ebola, the MERS, and it's a virus from a bat. How it reached us, those stories are as complicated as the geopolitics of this world today. And, if you want to be anti-China, you hit on the wet markets. You want to look at what America did, you look at the biowarfare labs. And in fact, the Wuhan lab is a joint venture. And that evidence is clear. It's a joint venture. So we know that new diseases are coming by destruction of the forest. So we are not separate.
Right.
And therefore, I wrote about one planet, one health. But it's not just that. We had hunger in this country, but we overcame it after independence.
Right.
And whatever it was, the poorest person eating their dal and roti was a healthy diet. Now, the middle class is going crazy on junk food. Pizza bhej do bhaiya. And we know that these junk foods cause chronic diseases. India is emerged as the epicenter because we have now the richest middle class, most alienated from its culture. And every year, 1 million people are dying of cancer. 1 million people are affected of cancer, of which 4 lakhs are dying every year. 4 lakhs. Diabetes, 72 million, and 1 million are dying every year. 1 million. And then if you look at the COVID corona data, if you get an infection and you are healthy and you're eating good food, 1% chance that you might be at risk. If you have diabetes, it shoots up to 9.2%. If you have prior cancer, it shoots up to 7.6%. And meantime, the hunger figures of India are exploding with the COVID crisis. I think if the story, when the story will be told of who died in this period, the story will not be that people died of corona. It'll be that children below 5 died of hunger. And to me, that image of the 12-year-old girl dying 1 mile away from her village home will be the Bhopal image of our times. It'll be that baby of a refugee on the beach in Europe. So our times are telling epic. Our times are an epic time. And in these epic times, we need to recognize epic stories and epic narratives. This is not about a virus alone. It's how we look at the virus and how we deal with it. That is the epic story. And we have to tell our own. We have to tell our own from our civilization, which is supposed to be an ecological civilization. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam cannot be just a slogan. It has to be a philosophy of the earth as one earth family, and no one below and no one above. All of these dualities, hierarchies are imported. And it's not that we didn't have a caste system, but we made it illegal. And now the untouchability has become the fashion of our times in this social distance lockdown mode. And everyone, people are killing each other with the fear that, oh my God, because if you have so much media attention on one virus, and people don't understand how it works in the body. People don't understand their other diseases also. They have no idea. So they're going for the media narrative. और ये नया राक्षस बन के आया है. ये जो है ना छोटा सा कोरोना आजकल के जमाने का राक्षस है.
I think you made a lot of pertinent points there. But just to think about it in this way, that a lot of climate activists maybe would say that the underlying problem that is leading to the emergence of so many viruses, like perhaps the Ebola or the SARS, and maybe even this one. Of course, we don't have enough data perhaps to go ahead and assert this. But the rates at which the Arctic is melting, or the rates at which deforestation is happening, the way we are destroying habitats, they have a large role in how these viruses might be emerging. And but what do you think it will take for people to wake up to maybe climate change as being the root cause of this, perhaps in one way? Do you think this might be a wake-up call in some sense?
Yeah. You know, as a scientist, I see climate change as an impact of something else, which is why it's called anthropogenic. Right. You know, if it was a natural phenomena, it would not be called anthropogenic. So what are the anthropogenic actions that are leading to it? When we destroy the sarson of India and make it illegal, and I had to do a sarson satyagraha in 98, to force us to have GMO soya. And the GMO soya is now used for animal feed, for biofuel, for feeding the people against their will, against their culture. Then the Amazon gets burned down. That burning of the Amazon is contributing both to climate change, to new diseases, and the threat to the indigenous people. You know, if you look at since 98, since globalization, since these new trade rules, what are most Indians eating? GMO soya oil and palm oil, which is subsidized. I've done many studies on this. It's cheap because it's subsidized. It's not cheap to take a bean that's not an oil seed and squeeze oil out of it through a solvent extraction plant, or to destroy the Indonesian forests, which will be gone by 2030, to grow palm oil and subsidize it and destroy local oils. So a lot of climate change activists of the West are confusing the consequences of human actions of a particular kind of economy, which is organized for the benefit of a handful of corporations. And now those corporations are owned by a handful of billionaires. I want to give you just two facts. In this period of the coronavirus and lockdown, as governments are putting more and more money out to bail out, an investment fund of the billionaires, which owns a lot of the corporations, called BlackRock, the other is called Vanguard, and it's to understand these and Bill Gates' role. I wrote the book Oneness versus 1%, published by Women Unlimited. BlackRock has increased its assets to $23 trillion. Can you imagine? This company does no work. It doesn't produce anything. It uses other people's money to drive investment. So of course, for it to burn the Amazon is more profitable than to let the Amazon stand. It is more profitable to destroy Indian agriculture and make it dependent on imports than to let Indian farmers defend their food sovereignty. So it is a global economy leading to biodiversity extinction, leading to disease pandemics, leading to hunger, and leading to climate change. And they're all related as one process. My study, Soil Not Oil, has shown that if you add, when I wrote it 10, 11 years ago, the figures were less. But now if you add the production of food, you add the deforestation, it's called land use in the climate treaty, you add transport, process, packaging, aluminium, plastic, all of this, and you add the waste. Let's add the amount of food waste happening right now because farmers can't sell what they're growing. That creates methane. Synthetic fertilizers create a nitrous oxide. All of this added together is 50% of the greenhouse gases. So if you want to address climate change, all you have to do is shift your agriculture so no one starves, so your biodiversity is protected, and your farmers have a livelihood. So only focusing on the polar bears on the Arctic will not bring you the solutions that are in people's hands and are able to deliver multiple benefits. And I think the big problem is of the dividing mind that we imported from the West. The fragmented mechanistic mind that always separates, and it creates silos and it creates territories. But the world is interconnected. On this Earth Day, we should wake up to the interconnectedness of the Earth. And therefore, every problem we create by destroying the Earth is connected to multiple problems. The same pesticides push species to extinction. The same chemical fertilizers lead to greenhouse gases. These are not independent problems that exist in silos. They are not linear problems. They are ruptures of the web of life. And the responsible people are not the human species as a whole, but some who thought they were privileged, who could trash other human beings, who could trash the earth and monopolize the gifts that the earth gives us.
So just before going ahead with my next question, so the way we had planned this session was maybe the last 10 minutes to open it up for questions. But there are two themes out of your last answer that I really want to touch upon. So to everyone watching on YouTube, I would request you to start writing down any questions that you might have for ma'am in the comment section. We'll try to get to as many of those as possible. While right here, we try to touch upon two more themes that I really want to get through. So the first one being that you really emphasized upon how we must look at the interconnectedness that might exist across borders. Except maybe when you look at the climate change discourse, there is one idea about some countries owing a climate debt to the others. Like my state, Odisha, there have been studies which are showing repercussions of tropical cyclones and an increase in frequency, and how that might be related to the developments happening in the first world. And so there's this concept coming up of, do they owe reparations to third world countries? And secondly, like for example, right now in COVID crisis, people are pointing out silver linings in how the climate is reacting positively. Except this positive action, like this positive reaction on one end, where as compared to the disparity being faced by millions of people, migrants, laborers, daily wage workers, who are having to perhaps suffer the consequences far worse than you and I. So how do maybe these problems reconcile with the kind of interconnectedness and maybe harmony we want to work towards?
So as far as the issue of ecological debt is concerned, I think the ecological debt is owed from the time of colonialism. After all, the British Empire was built by taking us from 27% of the world economy to 2% of the world economy. Yeah, and that is an ecological debt. Like it said, every sack of indigo went soaked in blood of the Indian people. That's why our first satyagraha was the Champaran satyagraha. I worked on the Orissa super cyclone. It's so clearly related to climate havoc because traditional cyclones went in 1 kilometer, and this was 3 times the velocity and went in 3 times inside. That's why we saved climate resilient seeds. You know, Orissa is the home of rice diversity. And we have a seed bank in Balasore. That seed bank has saved climate resilient seeds, salt tolerant seeds. Mr. Bill Gates claims to have invented salt tolerance by stealing our seeds. Our farmers had evolved these seeds. We have flood tolerant seeds. We have drought tolerant crops. Biopiracy is what I've named this phenomenon of the new colonialism. I think the idea of some of our friends in the West that, you know, that the corona crisis is good for nature, they're not realizing that at the same time, where cars have stopped and the cities have stopped bustling, and therefore some wild animals have come into the city, you can't bring the butterflies and bees you push to extinction back. Those pesticides are still being used. Secondly, it's in the middle of this corona crisis that wildlife reserves are being opened up for investment. So nature is not safe there. And in America, wildlife sanctuaries have been allowed to have spraying of pesticides and herbicides and GMO crops. So we are talking about the crisis being used for deregulation that was meant to protect nature. But there are friends of mine, like people like George Monbiot, who say the future needs to end farming, and it needs to put away farmers and food, and we must live in the future on the basis of food made in labs. First, he forgets that food made in labs will be made from food grown in mega industrial farms. Second, that we are nature. Nature is not outside us. It's this dichotomy that is so deep in the Western mind. They assume that you can fake our bodies and eat fake food. But as I mentioned in the beginning, chronic diseases are coming because we are eating junk food. Chronic diseases will amplify when we eat fake food because we are a reflection of nature. If there are forests outside, there's a forest within us. Our gut microbiome has 60 trillion microbes that turn what we eat into our body's benefits, into the enzymes that make neurotransmitters that make your brain work. And when those enzymes are not there, the bacteria aren't there, autism starts to explode. Even though Monsanto had said it doesn't affect humans, there is now realization that it does, because our gut is alive, our gut is a forest. So we cannot separate nature and us, and we cannot separate all of humanity from ourselves. I think the allowing of large numbers, half of India, to be homeless, work without food, jobless, without homes, homeless, is a very big crime against humanity. And anyone who thinks that people walking hungry on roads or sitting in detention centers is beneficial to nature are forgetting that we are all part of nature. They too are part of nature. And everyone has the same rights. The bees and the butterflies have a right to food. That child who's going hungry today has a right to food. Everyone has a right to water. Everyone has a right to have air and breathe. These foundational rights come from our being part of the earth, being species who are biological and are interwoven with the ecology. That is the new awakening we must have, which combines justice, equality, and using the earth's resources without destroying the earth. There is no separation between justice and treading lightly on the earth, because as Gandhi said, the earth has enough for everyone's needs, but not for a few people's greed. It's the greed that has destroyed the earth, and it's the greed that has put so many people out of work and left them hungry.
So, thank you. A lot of strong and precise arguments coming from that answer as well. And just to touch upon the last theme that I hope to talk to you about, which is because, like, I don't know, maybe it's to my eyes that in the conversation we have been having, the disparities and perhaps the struggles that happen in these arenas, in maybe agriculture, be it in climate change, and they do come around to the disparities and the distribution of power amongst individuals sometimes. Maybe we forget that we are all part of nature and we only see the divides that exist between us at points of time. But another divide that has sometimes been seen and at a lot of times been overcome too is that of gender. And I really want to come to ecofeminism here, in how, and as you mentioned, you have worked closely in the Chipko movement as well. But as a philosophy student, we've been seeing that in ecofeminism, at times we might end up essentializing the role of women to saying that only maybe they are capable of nurturing. And maybe consequences, be it intended or unintended, of that essentializing is that it might make it difficult for women to look at other avenues in terms of what society might be assigning to them. And that is a sort of critique that we come across of ecofeminism at times.
Those are academic critiques. And the reason I read academics is when life is at stake, it's too much of a luxury to say this person meant this when they said this. Baba, let the person who wrote speak what they want. So my books now are not books for academics. My books are a result of my experiences, my struggles, my dedication to defend life, women's rights, and the rights of the last human being. Ecofeminism is not a top-down philosophy that came from one individual. It has burst on the scene of contemporary times as we all realized in different parts of the world, and I realized on my own in India, that the essentializing was being done by capitalist patriarchy, which had said, we are separate from nature, we are conquerors and masters, we own nature, and nature's dead. But they also said, and men are superior to women, patriarchy declares that, and in that superiority, they defined women into nature. Now, I would not say women's liberation is the illusion of capitalist patriarchy where we are not part of nature. My struggles, whether it was beginning with Chipko or now for the last 35 years, since the Bhopal disaster, since the Punjab violence and agriculture, when Monsanto wanted to own and patent seeds saying, we are the inventors, we are the gods. I said, no, you don't. The women have evolved these seeds. I created Navdanya. We are not saying that only women can care. What we are saying, a capitalist patriarchal structure created an hierarchy of gender, but it also created an hierarchy of work. And it said, if you produce for yourself, you don't produce. The GDP is measured on the yardstick. If you produce what you consume, you don't produce. So sustenance societies, the peasant societies become zero. That's why you bring the chemicals. Women producing food becomes zero. Women bringing water becomes zero. That's why privatization becomes a natural phenomenon. So the invisibility of the real work that carries society, the work of peasants or workers or women, is at the heart of appropriating what the real producers do and making it look like it came from the creative power of a dead construct called capital, which is now increasingly becoming finance capital, which is increasingly in the future going to become cryptocurrency connected to the constructed identities that will be digitally worked out. And that's the economy that's being put in place. And I would ask young people like you to look at what's happening from the top, not just what's happening to the people who are hungry on the street, but what is the future? And my reading of today's time is the inequality of the past was their haves and have-nots. The inequality of the future, if we don't act, will be lives and live-nots. Who has a right to live and who will be allowed to die? And for this to be stopped, we do not say only women can care. We say women have to be the teachers of a transition where care becomes a humanity for all, men and women. That's why ecofeminism for me is not a philosophy for women. Ecofeminism is a philosophy for young men like you.
Definitely, and I agree. We must all look to it, and I've seen it happening definitely in lots of parts and where I've gone.
Yeah.
So I think now, if you still have some more time, if you could take.
I'll give time because you're young people. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I'll give 10 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll give 10 minutes.
That'll be good. So there's a common theme across some of the questions which talk about what should India's agrarian response, or what should be the actions taken in India's agrarian sector be in response to the COVID crisis right now? How should it fend for itself? And what path do you see post this COVID crisis? That's a common theme coming across in some of the questions.
So I've actually done a statement about what the response should be. The first, of course, is the immediate response to join the livelihoods of the farmers and the food needs of those who've been dispossessed. This rupture will collapse agriculture on the one hand and will push millions to hunger. Even the United Nations has had to call and say many more people will die of hunger than will die of COVID if we do not address this problem differently. The second issue we've written about clearly is my work, as I mentioned, began in 1884 because of the Bhopal disaster on the one hand, and for the people who are listening, I want to mention that the 6 people who died in Bhopal because of COVID, were all victims of the Bhopal disaster. So the poison and the pesticide made them more vulnerable to these new infections. Punjab was the other place. So I wrote my book, The Violence of the Green Revolution. And I realized then that how had we shifted our diets to just rice and wheat? How had the public distribution system become a centralized system of only rice and wheat? How come suddenly there was only one state providing for the whole country, Punjab? And what we've suggested is this decentralized system. We need a decentralized system. Also because Monsanto, whom I call my favorite company, is trying to get Punjab out of rice to make them grow hybrid corn, which will then be used for animal feed. And GMO BT cotton, which has already killed the farmers of Vidarbha and parts of Punjab in Bhatinda. The suicides are highest among the cotton farmers. So we need to shift to decentralization, and the money that is held by the center should be given to the states and to the panchayats to start growing crops that are right for that place without chemicals, so people don't get poisoned, people don't get sick. And we need to ensure that India has huge money. Our PDS system is the biggest in the world. Our food feeding program for children is huge. Our child welfare programs are big. If we add all these feeding programs for the poor and take that money and say, let's get good food to the people, what will happen is the migrants who are today jobless will become part of a new economy of growing healthy food, because what chemicals do is get rid of work. Whereas when you do organic, you have more people working on the land in the care economy, as I call it. So decentralization, diversity, and ensure there's a right to food, and put the money that's centralized today available in a decentralized way. Centralized corruption is very big. Decentralized, maybe one panchayat will be corrupt, but 10 at least will be sure no one's hungry in their domain. So we need to be able to trust our communities, to be able to govern themselves. And Orissa, I know, decentralized a bit, but we need to join the producers and the eaters. We need to create these circular economies, and we need to get rid of immediately the big stocks in our FCI go downs, and the ministers keep saying, 3 mahine ke liye khana hai. But no civilization survives on a 3 mahina khana. I watched villages in Rajasthan where they used to save grain for 10 years. A country's stocks should be at least for 3 to 5 years. And if the farmers aren't even able to reach their fields right now, aren't able to reach their mandis, there will be people, the lobbyists of the Cargills and the Monsantos are waiting for us to become import dependent, like so much of Africa has begun. And then we're going to get more hunger, more disease, and more dispossessed people. So food has to be put at the center of what I call a just recovery after COVID.
So I think we'll have time for one more answer. So I'll try to club together a few things and you can deal with them as you prioritize. So there's one question which is saying, is farming really changing itself in terms of increased demand of food, degrading soil health, lowering level of groundwater, and also with changing rainfall patterns? So this is, and there's some other concerns about how, if countries are playing into the hands of the corporates, then how, where does maybe India look to if looking away, and what kind of path do you see for India there? And just another theme that someone has touched upon is that when you work in this domain, how do you know that what you're doing is working? How do you maybe understand the effects of your work? I think these are just the facts from the comments which I want you to deal with. Yeah.
So, I started Navdanya because I didn't accept the fact that all seeds should be in Monsanto's hand, which is what they had declared. And I didn't accept the ontological illusion that the seed is a machine that they invent. I know seed is evolution, seed is culture, seed is the intelligence of our farmers, it's their breeding. How do I know that it was effective that we saved seeds? Because the seeds are there now. We've created 150 community seed banks. For the ones who are worrying about how do you change agriculture, I started with the simple fact of saving seeds. And I called it Beat Swaraj, seed sovereignty. But out of it, we grew biodiversity. And now our research is showing that our farmers grow so much. We changed the indicator. The Green Revolution was based on yield per acre, which only measures the commodity that leaves the farm, not the state of the soil, not the state of the farmer, not the state of the rural community, just the commodity that went to FCI earlier and now to Cargill. We said, no, what matters in food is nutrition. So we shifted to nutrition per acre. We can feed 2 times India's population by growing biodiversity of our native seeds. And this is again and again and again in hundreds of farms where Navdanya farmers are working. That's another evidence that it works. In terms of incomes, chemical farming and corporate farming is basically a suction of incomes of farmers. You sell costly seeds, costly chemicals, and then you drive down the prices of what you grow. Just like oil prices have crashed to negative, food prices are also crashing to next to negative. So farmers are squeezed, and that's why they're committing suicide. When they have their own seeds, they do ecological farming, they use their knowledge, they use their resources. Farmers who are autonomous, who practice what I call Anna Swaraj, are earning 10 times more than the farmers chasing Monsanto's hybrid corn, GMO BT cotton. It works. 35 years I've done this with hundreds of thousands of farmers. And those farmers are the evidence. And now in the COVID crisis, they're ringing me up and saying, Didi, आपने जो हमको बता दिया ना बीज बचाने का और अपनी having our own garden for nutrition, that is what's taking care of us in this crisis. Diversity is resilience. Cultural diversity is resilience. Biological diversity is resilience. And if India is rich in something, it is rich in diversity. That's why SPIC MACAY is such an important platform. And this is why I've given you time. Respect for SPIC MACAY. And just as there's a threat to biodiversity in agriculture from monocultures of chemical farming, there's a threat to our cultural diversity, both from the monoculture of superiority and hate, but there's also a threat from the monoculture of a junk consumerism, junk clothing, junk food, junk thinking, and our civilization needs to be renewed. Like SPIC MACAY took on the issue of music and arts, it is time to take all of our civilization and say, we cannot afford to say to 50% of India, you don't matter, you don't count, you are disposable people. We have created junk. I grew up in India that had no waste, no junk. Now we have mountains of plastic. I don't want our people, our citizens, to be treated like waste. Their hands, their heads, their hearts, that is what should be put to work to make the new India. People and their creativity has to be the new India.
Okay. So thank you very, very, very.
Thank you.
I won't be taking any more questions, but if just in case Dr. Seth would like to say anything before we conclude this session, Dr. Seth, if you can hear me, if in case you would like to either say anything, ask anything, or if you would like to conclude.
I'd just like to thank Vandana ji for the very, very inspiring and informative session that we have had with her. Very inspiring and very informative. We thank her very much for it.
Thank you.
Okay. Then
Thank
I
Okay,
go on.
thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
thank you everyone for watching. Just before concluding the live stream, we have some descriptions in the of the live stream where we have descriptions about ma'am's work and also about the thing about SPICMACAY as well as SPICMACAY's crowdfunding campaign, in which we are doing a campaign to raise money to pay our artists who have done programs for us before and to clear off some of our debt. So if you could donate here, and you could definitely make sure that you go through ma'am's website and get more familiar with the work, that will be very, very nice. So on that note, thank you everyone for joining so much, and please keep safe in these times. Thank you.
Well done, very well done. Very